Okay, well, so thanks for joining. So I'm going to work my way through here, and you can also help if you're here and you have your question. You can wiggle it around. Is anyone here and has a question they put in the mural board? You could just wiggle the post-it, and I'll try to start on that one. I love murals highlighter feature, so I could do stuff like this. How do I do it? Oh, Carrie, I'm screwing up. I'm not being a good mural evangelist. I know there's a highlighter in here. I just can't figure out. Can't remember how to do it.
The H.
There, I have to hold the H button. Yes. Love it. So if this is yours, let's see, who's this? Okay. Okay. I don't see any wiggling around quite yet. So I'm just going to kind of work from the top down. I'm definitely going to screw your name up. Amarjit. Help me out. I think I saw you in here. Come off mute.
Amarjit.
Amarjit?
Yeah.
Close enough? Okay.
Yeah.
Let me
Call me Amar, it's easier.
Let me start with yours then. Okay. And so like I try to theme them just to make it easier to find your stuff, and helps me in preparing for these. I go through them and I just take a look at the questions that are coming up. So let's start here. So first question, how do you know if the problem you're addressing is actually a problem and isn't just driven by wisdom of the crowd, or need to complete a project or other biases drivers? Yeah, great question. So, since we're talking specifically about problem framing, it depends. So I work with, right now I'm actually working with two groups who are at different ends of the spectrum. If you've all seen this, ever seen Nielsen Norman's stages of UX maturity? So right now I'm working with a group that's here, coming into here, right? There's like great UX practices. They have lots of research. They're super mature in some ways, but then they're also in this messy middle, right? So that's tough. That's confusing at points. And then I'm also working with a group here. These are two large companies, but like the maturity in terms of them being customer minded and design driven, and using data as insights and doing qualitative reviews and things of that nature. They're at different stages of that. So this group is fairly open to it. They're very solution minded. Most groups are, most human beings are. They're very solution minded. They have lots of ideas. There's a lot on the line of the project that I'm helping them work through. So just because of that, because there's pressure to deliver, there's business metrics that are being associated with the success of the work that we're doing. So because of that, it's going to be a natural tendency for them to bring their own assumptions and biases. Whereas here, they have a lot of research and customer insights, but they can also get wrapped around the axle. So they can spend too much time thinking about the customer. Whereas they're free from bias for the most part. They almost they anchor on their research. So they're biased in terms of their research is better than your research and things of that nature. So I think no matter where you're at, maybe when you're here and the entire organization is singing Kumbaya and is like 100% driven by what's best for the customer, and also find interesting opportunities to make money as well. That seems like a great stage to be at. It feels like the group is always bringing some bias to the conversation. And that is where great facilitation practices can come into play. So, like talking to people ahead of time and asking them what their expertise is. What's your role in this conversation? What are you going to bring to the conversation? Where do we want to get to by the end of it? So understanding like what's driving some of their motivations. And then, just kind of continuing to put the customer front and center. So if you have that research, making sure that we're asking, how does this relate to a customer driven problem? Yeah. So things of that nature always comes in. There's always like, what I also tell people is that framing, since it's most of the time I do it in 2 half-day sessions, sometimes 3 half-day sessions. So because it's not weeks and months of time, what I also tell the group is we should come into it, we can bring some research into the conversation, but we should also be able to get through the conversation, because then afterward, what I tend to do is work with the research team or do the research myself to qualify the problems that we're looking to solve that come out of a framing session, right? So like we may, as a team, decide that we think we know what the experience is like, what the pains and challenges for the customer are as they exist today. But then we can also end at that point, assuming that this is the internal wisdom of the group. And now let's go challenge it. Let's go talk to some customers. Let's ask them, are these problems you're struggling with? How do you solve them today? No, it's not important. What is a problem? And then we can kind of refactor. So that also ties back to setting expectations up front, that innovation, or kind of like working through any kind of process like this, is not a straight line, and that we may have to go back and refactor and retalk and rethink and readdress the problems. So setting those expectations, super important. And while we're here, you've got another one up here. What do you do if the boss says, we love bosses. What do we do if the boss says this isn't a problem, or doesn't care about the problem and only wants us to focus on their problem? Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's a lot of similarity between these two questions, right? Like bias and ego and assumptive thinking, even group thinking. These are all the tendencies that people bring into a group conversation. The more people in the group, the more we tend to be needing to defend our ideas. And so again, the simplest way that I solve for that is to continue to take the pressure off of them to be right after a single conversation. That's most important. That helps them lower their guard a little bit, but then also asking them to restate it in the voice of the customer. So most times, even with lots of explanation and training, and this is what this looks like, when I ask people to write down the problem that the customer is facing, it's something like the login doesn't work, right? And it's feature driven. It's something that's not enough. This channel isn't converting as well. That's definitely not a customer problem. So a lot of it is like coaching them through the process until they're clear and they can put it in the voice of the customer. And sometimes then they back off of it because they realize that it's business driven. Framing is also a conversation that needs a group of people. So, and it's a strategic conversation. So there are bosses in the room, and there are bosses of bosses in the room. So it's very tricky. There's a lot of opinions and a lot of expertise and a lot of internal influence and power that are part of these conversations. So making sure that all of those people feel heard and I'm capturing their ideas, putting things on the fridge for follow-up conversations. So again, like really good facilitation to make sure everyone feels heard and we're capturing all the ideas. More specifically though, if this is something, what I hear is that'll never work here. We've tried that before, right? And asking them to qualify what that looked like. Again, a very relevant problem I'm dealing with right now with a company I'm working within. Multiple squads, multiple groups of people that are all touching parts of the experiences together, and some are fixing things at like more of a higher level interface level, and others are rethinking the experience. So allowing the group to articulate the altitude at which a problem is being solved and who's working on certain things and how that's being addressed. Even just having like a 5-minute conversation to articulate what does that look like? How are we solving it today? Often can either we can decide as a group, yes, it is being worked on, not important, or actually we should talk about this right now. Good questions. Just check the chat. Okay. Carrie says hi. Cool. Okay, I'm going to move these over here so I know we talked about them. Who defines? I don't know what that question means. I'm going to move on. I see another one from you. I'm going to answer it. Let me just check if there's any others. This is a fun one. Let me do this one. This is easier to answer. Yeah. Okay. Well, this is about the toolkit, right? So in the toolkit, there are the sort of the workhorse of the toolkit are the digital templates that come with it so that you can shape and lead those conversations, which is obviously much more important nowadays as we're working remotely in hybrid setups. Fortunately for me, I got to start doing that stuff years and years ago. Actually, the reason, Carrie, you'll like the story, the reason I was able to do that is because I called my friend Jim Kalbach because I was in a pinch in 2017 because I had a workshop coming up and my stakeholders told me they were going to be in different parts of the country and that no worries, we'll just dial in. And I had like been to Staples. I had all these supplies. I was heading up. I was Rosetta Stone. I was heading up to Cambridge to work with their team. And they were like, no, we'll just dial in. We don't need to be together. So I had to take the whole workshop, a problem framing workshop, which I at the time didn't have as much experience doing. This was like four years ago. And I needed to make it digital and visual. So Jim gave me a license to Mural and I've been doing remote work ever since. So that was a long story.
Very hot when there's a heat wave and the paraffin wax.
Oops. Mute. There she goes. Okay. Lost my train of thought. Yeah. So anyway, so the templates in the toolkit are a huge resource that I use. This is what problem framing looks like. This is how I shape problem framing. So these are like the conversation that I lead and how I shape them inside of Mural. So Mural is was the first set of templates that I created and created a toolkit around. And then, you know, some of my work, because I have clients that use Miro, that use other digital whiteboarding solutions. I do work in those tools as well. So there's support for Miro as well. And then questions like this come up. So I've been talking with the team in Envision because they have freehand. And then there's also Figjam. Okay. So the answer is yes. I just don't know when. So I just have to invent some time to do that. It's not so straightforward, and most of the platforms aren't as supportive. So the answer is yes. I'll keep you posted on when that would happen if you're here. Is Peter here? Yes. Oh, this Peter. Yes. My friend Peter. Okay. Let's see. Peter asked, where does analyzing the competitive environment fit into problem framing? Is something like a SWOT analysis useful at an early stage? This is a great question. This for me is, I don't do benchmarking as part of framing because I consider framing to be an internal strategic conversation. So based on what we know, again, think about that Nielsen-Norman stages of maturity. Based on what we know, whether it's just the five of us hanging out and we know the industry because we've been working here for a long time, or because we have all this research, based on what we know, what are the right problems for us to be talking about? What's the best problem for us to work on first? What does that look like? How can we humanize it? How can we find interesting parts to improve and make better for our customers? That is, for me, that's what framing looks like. I have experimented with different things like a SWOT. In my first toolkit, there was a SWOT in there because I used the SWOT because what tended to happen was we get through this part where this group of people was excited about solving a problem. And then we go through the SWOT and it would open up a conversation. SWOT stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So we'd find a problem. And then the question would be, what are the things that we're investing in? People, partnerships, channels that we could build upon that would be a good that would make solving this problem better and more to our advantage? And then flip it around. Where would we fall down? Where would we face challenges? What would be some obstacles we face? Great conversation to have, not necessarily benchmarking, but a good sort of like a rigor test to make sure that the problem is going to stand the test of time inside the company. And a lot of times what that would do is it would help the group say, actually, I think a group is working on this. We should double check. So I would do it in that sense. I wasn't getting as much value out of it. So I've tabled it as far as framing goes. But what I do see is that groups take framing, and then I'm an outside facilitator, right? So what then they're then asked to do is to qualify the problem based on data, based on benchmarking, based on competitive insights and things of that nature. So it's not enough in big companies where there's lots of levels to deciding what's most important to work on. In an ideal situation, this group is empowered to say, we're going to go with this thing and we're going to go in that direction. But in super large companies or whatever, sometimes that group still needs to get the authority and the approval, or at least to check in. So they'll go to analytics, they'll go to like a research team, they'll go to a business strategy team, and they'll ask them to evaluate this as in terms of the opportunity that it could bring to the company. I don't touch that work. Most of the time that lands with those teams inside. So it's connected to framing. I just don't do it. Good one. Okay. What else we got? Thank you. Jim is a superhero. I have to catch up with Jim. I think these are old questions. I see more, man, now I forgot how you pronounce your name. One more time.
It's Amarjit.
Amarjit. Okay.
Just call me Amo. It's much easier.
Amo?
Yeah.
All right.
Everyone gets it wrong.
So Amo, thanks for all these questions. They're great. So I'm going to work through Amo's. If you have more questions, drop them in the mirror
I apologize for overtaking everybody else's questions.
They're great questions. Better to have good questions than to just be kind of hanging out, twiddling our thumbs. So great questions. I appreciate it. Amo asks, what are the materials of problem framing? So maybe we started to address some of that stuff, you know, and the materials look a lot different these days than they used to a year and a half ago. The materials used to look like this, and, you know, all those other things, things that I would buy on Amazon and Staples and things like that. It would look like food. It would look like space. It would look like, yeah, like large poster printouts where I would shape up these conversations, and now they look like this. So a lot of the time, what I refer to it as visualizing the conversation, because that's all that this is really. Framing is just another conversation. It's just, I've taken the principles of facilitation and design thinking or human-centered design, and I've shaped it to keep bias and ego and groupthink to a minimum, to bring the voice of the customer and put them front and center, to work on problems that the group is excited to work on, not just stuff that the boss thinks are important to work on. So that's how it goes from a conversation to something that's structured. So that is what, those are the materials, you know, and they also sometimes, because a team and because framing is very abstract, it's very squishy, which I also tell people over and over again. So sometimes it's videos that describe what happens when we don't reframe a problem. Sometimes it's a Loom video that I create to talk people through the process and help them feel more at ease so they can come. Sometimes it's meditating as a group at the start of it, because problem space work is hard. So the materials, it's a really interesting question to ask. The materials are all sorts of things. They're also like slide decks and things like that to just show people what we're going to be doing. But I try to keep slides to a minimum these days. Thanks, Amo. Here's a question from Roz, who I know is here. How do you introduce framing to an immature UX practice? For example, a company that hasn't quite adopted UX yet. Well, okay. So a goal of mine is to be as lazy as possible because it's very difficult to take people through from the ground up of why UX is important when they're just not even there. And, so like Roz, you probably know that you have to speak to people in the language that they're coming and, connecting it to what drives them, like motivationally, emotionally, what drives their paycheck and their promotion status and all those things. So like a lot of that is talking with people one-on-one. So if most of the time a person in like a UX leadership position will hire me or someone in product or CX or something like that. So most of the time we're fairly aligned, me and this one person or me and this one person plus their 1 to 2 counterparts who are like trying to shift that there needs to be a change. Because UX is like, it's about better products and services, but really what it's about is different ways of working, having more empathy for our customer, doing the research, keeping the assumptions out of it. But it's also about like better ways of collaborating so that we can do that work together. So there's education. At this point, I feel like I've like documented or created videos or created like stories around why this is important and what happens when we don't do this kind of stuff. I have a course dropping from Envision, their new Learn platform, where I share and tell a story about what framing is and what it's looked like for me. And so like, I have to figure out where that person is in the journey of deciding if being more user-centered is important to them. If they're at that super early stages, I try to just introduce it to them through like saying microdose seems like I'm talking about mushrooms. Maybe I'm watching 9 Perfect Strangers and she microdoses everyone that goes to her retreat center. Totally off topic. But I try to give it to them in really small bite-sized chunks so they can get it and then say like, I understand what this is, check. Now I can start to understand how I would apply it to this thing that I'm doing. All I wanted was for you to build this feature. Now I understand if we don't talk about these things, your team will spend 3 weeks building something that neither one of us will be excited about. So I try to like demonstrate, I dog food a lot of the process to say like, we can do that, but if I don't understand what's important to you as my customer, UX leader, business leader, then we're both going to spend time on things that we shouldn't. So like, I try to dog food the process, demonstrate what it's going to be like, really demonstrate wins as quickly as possible, bring case studies, bring stories of what this will look and feel like, and then maybe invite them to like a 1-hour conversation where I'll like demonstrate some of UX style thinking. And then, even sometimes the tools themselves, like Mural has helped me sell UX work many, many times because they're like, that was different. It was like, I appreciated that you structured the conversation and that we were able to talk and like evaluate and see our ideas without like going in all these weird different circles. So it's bite-sized chunks. If you all have follow-ups or like you want to throw more wrenches and context, feel free to drop it in the chat and then we'll go back into it. Or Roz, yeah, you look like you want to jump in.
Yeah, I could follow up on that. So I'm trying to ask questions that aren't specifically like, tell us about facilitating. But if UX had, like, I appreciate everything you said about an early maturity UX practice, but I'm also thinking about alignment when like teams are siloed and that someone's bringing it and then the other people that didn't bring the idea are like feeling a lot of resistance. So if you could offer anything about managing that.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like it feels like sometimes I don't know what I do for a living because it used to be that I would show up and I'd like facilitate a sprint, but then I realized that if that sprint wasn't well structured and well informed and there wasn't a clear problem, then we'd spin in circles. But then I realized that like the people that needed to do the discovery work and evaluate and prioritize, They were busy and preoccupied and like fending off their territory. So I realized that I was almost getting into like change management and org design. So your question is super timely because it's also something that I'm facing right now with a group that I'm working with. And I'm thinking a lot about it because I don't think I could fix silos in a sprint or in like a single project or something. But when I do this work, those things become evident and I'm able to like call them out and say, this might have gone differently if this were true. It's hard to answer this question because it's like, as an outsider, and I'm not sure, I forget if you're working inside a company. As an outsider, I also have more freedom.
I'm inside.
Yeah. So I also have more freedom to point things out, like emperor has no clothes kind of thing. Like I can flag those things in a nice way. But what happens is, maybe I might not have an answer to this, but I can just say what it looks like from where I see it. What it looks like is that instead of having a conversation where what we know, based on what we know today, let's have this conversation. Everything is qualified by, I can't speak for them, but, or I don't have, my research isn't ready for these things, or that's being handled by another group and I can't speak to that. So it's like, there's no ability to just have the conversation as it is. And it just you can almost see the walls between the groups. And that's just because they've gotten burned over and over again for like working on things that weren't like fully vetted, or, you know, like taking too long to do the research to prove that they should work on something. So it's tricky. It's hard. I'm not sure I have an answer to it. And it's also been 12 years since I've had a job. So yeah, I'm a little bit outside looking in, and it looks hard. It makes my job harder when that exists. I know that to be the case. Yeah, maybe we could also talk about it a little bit offline. Maybe just a quick therapy session together. Let's see. Cool. I've got 12:40 Eastern. So we've got like 15 more minutes, and then I'll just wrap up, talk about maybe an upcoming event or two, and then we'll get out of here. Let's see. I'm just kind of bouncing around down here. I'm pretty sure these are older questions. Let's take this one from Amo. Where did you learn your process, methods, techniques of problem framing? Well, we didn't invent framing at all. Well, what happened was, super tactically, what happened was we were running lots of design sprints for groups. So I think design sprints are still like very interesting to a lot of companies. At the time, we were running sprints, and there wasn't a lot of like guardrails in place of when to do them, when not to do them, what should you do before, what should you do after. So we were kind of like operating a little in the dark, right? And like people like Jake and other people like Kai Haley at Google and John Zaratsky, Jake Knapp, they've always been super helpful. But some of it too, because the context was always shifting, was operating a little squishy. So we were kind of like probing around in the dark. And what happened was we would find ourselves in a conversation about like solutioning, even if it was like prototyping and like wireframing and fast, quick ideas, paper prototypes, whatever they look like. And we realized that we had the wrong people in the room. We were working on things that weren't strategically aligned. So a stakeholder would come in and be like, nope, not that. Or most often, it wasn't customer centered. So we would put the ideas that came out of a sprint in front of customers, and they'd be like, I don't know why I would ever spend time on this. I do this, it's fine. Right. So spending a week, even though it's a week, spending a week, and at the time, flying people in from all different parts of the country to figure out that you're working on an unimportant problem is crappy. So we thought like there must be a conversation to be had before sprints. And that's sort of like, I've told this story before, that's sort of like That's almost the story of New Haircut. We started as a design development. So then we figured out that we could do wireframing more quickly to figure out what it was and how it was going to work. Then we kept moving further and further up or back in the conversation. And we were at sprints, we were convinced this is where we begin. And we realized that there's more stuff to happen. So we went out looking for ways to structure that. My former business partners who run Design Sprint Academy helped create like some of the foundational ideas around problem framing. They have a great process as well. John and Donna Batan, who run Design Sprint Academy in Berlin. And since then, I've kind of just taken it, and in the work that I do, it continues to shift and evolve. What I try to keep as steady are like my facilitation principles, which if you're interested what those are, because I keep talking about them, you should totally check out, sorry for the whiplash there. You should check out this mini course. It's old. It's like a couple of years old at this point, but it's like some of the things that I believe to be important as a facilitator. It's a free mini course. You sign up, you get one tip or one lesson per day in your inbox. And then there's also this video series down here, which I've also, speaking of being lazy, I've been lazy this past summer because I've just been like too busy to do them, but they're conversations I have with UX and product leaders about what facilitation looks like. So also some good things in there. Yeah, and that's what I make sure that I always kind of take into any conversation I'm shaping. I also say this, this is sort of a tangent to your question, Amo, but the difference between a facilitator and a taskmaster is someone that's really organized is going to be a good facilitator. They'll keep the team moving forward. They'll keep you time box. They'll like manage the process and get you through it. Once you become a facilitator, you're able to understand how to like shape the conversation. Like my friend Daniel Stillman talks about like the arc of the conversation, where to bring them into it, where there's going to be a whole bunch of complexity, where like convergent ideas need to take some form and shape. And then also, as Daniel likes to say, how to land the plane and how to close it so that the close of that conversation can open up whatever's next. And so those are like, because I've developed that foundation in order to see what the expectations and needs of the team are, where they want to get to and who's in the room, I'm able to shape those. And problem framing is just one framework that I use to do that. Thanks for asking. Okay. Oh, I know you had some others up here, so I'll get to yours since you're here. I think you did. This is Chose. This is an old one. I remember Chose. I don't think, Chose, are you here? Nicole's here. Nicole.
Hey.
I think if there's any that you want me to address right now before I spend time on things, is there a difference between problems that are near term and I read one before that I wanted to answer. These are actually really good questions right here. I want to take one or two of them as much time as we have. These are good. Can you have done the impact of it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So these are all like, it looks like this person was exploring the toolkit and like my specific framing process that I use. So these are cool. If you know the process, which is kind of like this, if you know the process, these questions were related to that. So I'm curious, this one feels a little bit more higher level. I don't know who asked this, but the question is, it feels like the user needs are not being considered early on in identifying the problem. How do you incorporate this? Probably answer this pretty quickly and succinctly. I just ask people to restate it in the voice of the customer. So when I see login is cumbersome, right? What I ask them is, and first I do it for them. I say, great, why is that a problem for the customer? And at first they think I'm being sarcastic, or right, they kind of like, they slog through it. But eventually it turns into something like, customers spend too much time trying to get to their account information. Something like this, right? So I'm like constantly trying to reshape it. This is obviously a very simple one. A lot of the time they're really confusing and abstract. So again, repeatedly asking them to put it in the voice of the customer is helpful. And that also balances things. It puts things on an even keel so that we're not talking about system level features and, you know, like things that are important to the business. We're all talking about the customer and how it's impacted. So even at the very early, the first conversation they do, which is through an activity called the Smart Sailboat, I ask them to put all of the potential problems they want to work on in the voice of the customer. So I start them out of the gate talking about the customer. I'm just picking one. Actually, I moved this to the side because I thought it was interesting. So I'll just take this as the last one, and then we'll close up and come back in a couple of weeks and we'll do this again. Can different problem framing techniques give you different problems to go after? And if so, how do you make a decision to use one technique over another? Well, okay. I have a process. I never use the same exact 100% process or facilitate it the same way for different groups. It always changes. There's always, right, different context. An easier way to answer this question, maybe, because I want to know, what do you mean by different problems? And I don't think that person is here. If you are, let's talk. An easier way just to see what this, I think what this is asking about. Sometimes I get asked the question, instead of doing like 8 hours of framing over 3 or 4 sessions, is there anything we can do in 30 minutes? And when I do that, actually in my newsletter today, I just kind of like seeded this idea. You can do framing just by asking people to grab a Post-it and write down the problem that we're here to work on today. And what tends to happen is there's 8 people in the room. There are 5 completely different problems, and then 3 versions of those 5 problems in very different ways or for different customers. And just doing that in itself is a great starting point, because you say, okay, and maybe Roz, to answer your question, you could just do that as an activity. So if someone's challenging you, like, why is UX, why is problem framing, why is this stuff important? You say, okay, well, actually then let's get the team together, and you can set them up for an exciting failure where like everyone comes to the table with a different view of what the problem is and why it's important and who it affects. And that is a great opening of, cool, it sounds like we should spend more time making sure that we're clear and aligned on what the problem is that we're here to solve, so that we can XYZ, create amazing, innovative, breakthrough experiences. So that's a very different flavor of framing than an 8-step comprehensive process. But at the end of the day, it still gets you to the same point, where there's like a little bit of divergent and convergent thinking around what we're here to work on. The only other thing I can think about this is I also invite groups to think about the levels of complexity that they want to solve. So what is this group here to work on? Is it like simple wins, which doesn't often lend itself well to problem framing? Problem framing is really about like complex areas. So sometimes though, the group says like, we want to work on complex, but this is new, or there's a lot on the line, or we're in a rush timeline, or this whole team of people is waiting for the ideas to come out of this session. So let's just take these simple things. So also even just thinking about like a broad range of potential problems to work on and deciding to work on things that are simple, complicated, or complex. I use this lovely Cynefin framework to have that conversation. So sometimes that is where framing can go in very different directions and what you might do next. Yeah. Awesome. Well, hey, thank you all. These are really great questions. Makes me squirm and remember how hard working in that problem space is. I appreciate the questions. Let me just show you if you're interested. So like one of the questions that I didn't get to today is, does this design sprint need to happen after framing? No, because framing is really just like, what are all the opportunities? What one do we want to talk about next? And what does that look like? And what that looks like could lead to like a new marketing strategy. It could lead to like business process improvements. It could lead to a new digital something or other that needs prototypes and that nature. But you know, they can and should be separate conversations, but they do also work really well together. And to that point, the next event that I'm doing is Wednesday, October 3rd at 12 p.m. So you can go to newhaircut.com/events, sign up for that one as well. Also free, also sponsored by our lovely partners at Mural. So thanks again to them. And that's it. I appreciate you all being with me here today. And if any other questions, I'm going to send you a recap email. It's coming from me, so reply. If there's more stuff you want to talk about, reply to it and we'll talk some more. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, gang.